All right, here we are for the Japanese internment video. What we have here is Pearl Harbor's impact on the Japanese. We've looked at Pearl Harbor. We've looked at what happened at Pearl Harbor, and so basically, what does this say for Japanese Americans? We've looked at the Canadians. We'll refer to them a little bit during this podcast, but this is mainly going to be about the Japanese Americans. So there's 119,000 people of Japanese ancestry. 2/3 of them, American citizens, were living in California, Washington, and Oregon. 148,000 people of Japanese descent living in Hawaii. And there was around 21 to 23,000 Japanese that lived in British Columbia. Now, if you look at these numbers, you look at this number right here, 148,000 compared to 119,000 people, it would seem that Hawaii would be the biggest concern. And yet, although there was martial law, which meant that you had to follow curfews and you had to be off the streets at certain points, most of that was enforced by the National Guard of Hawaii that happened to be majority Japanese. When you look at the 119,000 here on the West Coast, that seems kind of confusing, especially since Hawaii was one that was attacked and the West Coast was never attacked. You see here is the Pledge of Allegiance said by mostly Japanese children. Curtis Munson, a State Department employee who was sent to investigate the loyalty of the Japanese on the West Coast, stated in his report, for the most part, the local Japanese are loyal to the United States. We do not believe that they would be, at the least, any more disloyal than any other racial group in the United States with whom we went to war. Assistant Commissioner Meade, in his report to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Commissioner S.T. Wood, wrote, "No fear of sabotage be expected from the Japanese in Canada. I felt this is a broad statement. At the same time, I find it to be true." So initial reports from officials are basically saying we don't have anything to fear from the Japanese. February 1942, reports to Roosevelt, sabotage is on the horizon, influences 9066, and DeWitt was put in charge. And here was General DeWitt's feeling on the issue. A Jap is a Jap. They are dangerous elements. There is no way to determine their loyalty. It makes no difference whether he is an American. Theoretically, he's still a Japanese, and you can't change him by giving him a piece of paper. General DeWitt speaking to a congressional committee. You can see this was an official comment and an official event, and you can definitely say that this is strange. The attack of Pearl Harbor shocked American public, resulting in widespread hysteria and paranoia. February 19, 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order number 9066. So 9066 was an executive order that was drawn up by General DeWitt and others that were pushing the president to do Japanese internment. Now, 9066, all it says is the following. He may, from time to time, designate whenever he or any designated commander deems action necessary or desirable to prescribe military areas in such places and of such extent as he wrote the appropriate military commander may determine from which any or all persons may be excluded, and with respect to which the right of any person to enter, remain in, or leave shall be subject to whatever restrictions the Secretary of War or the appropriate military commander may impose in his discretion. This is almost a blank check to go ahead and declare any area that they want to a military area without having to prove to anybody why it's a military area, and then be able to exclude any people they want from it. So Roosevelt doesn't mention certain people in here, but this order itself is kind of a blank check to the military. And it was the military that was pushing for internment. And it wasn't just the military, but it was also politicians and people of the West Coast. Of all the races ineligible to citizenship, the Japanese are the least assimilable and the most dangerous to the country. They come for the purpose of colonizing and establishing here the proud Yamamoto race. They never cease to be Japanese. This seems to be a common belief held by DeWitt and others that are saying that the Japanese need to be interned and in some cases removed from the West Coast. This was in an army manual, how to tell a Chinese from a Jap as far as the internment and who they were going to. You take a minute to read this, but it is extremely racist and shows just the feeling that official army doctrine can have for people of Asian descent. Fear of disloyalty, common among many Americans. The Issei, those born in Japan, regarded by the U.S. government as ineligible for U.S. citizenship. Then there was the Nisei, those born to Japanese parents, thus U.S. citizens. And the Kibei, those U.S. born but partially schooled in Japan, considered the most dangerous of the Nisei. Now, and you can see here, 1/3 of Hawaii were Japanese descendants. Thus, many of them were not interned. However, the islands were placed under martial law. And when you look at a lot of the documents at the time, one of the reasons they didn't intern the Japanese in Hawaii is because they felt like that would cripple the Hawaiian economy, which Pearl Harbor depended on. It's very interesting, though, that this economic concern trumped any other concerns, and that they just declared martial law. Why not declare martial law on the West Coast as well, and not take their property away, take all the different aspects away from them? Internment. Many assets were frozen, making it difficult for many Japanese Americans to move from the West Coast. You can see, so one of the things that happened was, okay, so they came out and said, okay, you have to move out of this area, but in declaring that a military zone, they also froze Japanese assets, so they couldn't move them out to other Japanese places. They couldn't move them to different places, and so that basically left them with this idea that they no longer now have they can't get access to their money, so that they could just move out voluntarily, move to another place out of the West Coast. The March 2nd, 1942 Public Proclamation Number 1 creates military areas Number 1 and 2. Military Area Number 1 includes the western portion of California, Oregon, and Washington, and part of Arizona. Military Area Number 2 includes the rest of these states, and they needed to move to Military Area Number 2. March 18th, 1942, second executive order that basically puts into action Japanese internment, and that's Executive Order 9102. And this establishes the War Relocation Authority, and you can see here the different aspects of that. The $5.5 million specific to Japanese relocation. March 21st, 1942, the first Japanese American volunteers arrive at Mazinar, California. The War Relocation Authority would take over on June 1st and transform it into a relocation center. And again, we ask the question, why not Hawaii? Which seems to believe that this might be more about removing Japanese from the coast, removing them from the West Coast, than it is about security. First to go was actually in this area. Bainbridge Island was one of the places. You could see here this San Francisco. The first exclusion order issued by the Army is issued for the Bainbridge Island area near Seattle. 45 families there are given 1 week to prepare. By the end of October, 108 exclusion orders would be issued. All Japanese Americans in Military Area Number 1 and the California portion of Number 2 would be incarcerated. Basically, many Japanese lost their land to foreclosure or because they couldn't pay. They weren't earning money in the camp, so they couldn't pay their rent. Or they were forced to sell at cut-rate prices. People knew that they were going to be interned and then took advantage of that and so they got very little for their property. There's a story of one family that had worked so hard to get this piano that they had saved their money up and they would not sell it for less than what it was worth. So they took it out into the backyard and they They took axes to it because nobody was going to have it if they couldn't have it. Just showing the pride that they felt in their belongings and how angry they were at what was happening to them. So you can see here, there's a lot of the camps here. Tool Lake was a camp for anybody that caused any problems within the camp, refused to go to the army, and refused to, or were suspected of any type of sabotage or any type of problems. The rest of these camps were for all other Japanese people. You can see that most, when they were leaving, was in 45, 45, 44. And you can see that most of these were the people that were incarcerated for reasons, so then they decided, or they weren't let go till 46. Aerial view of Camp Harmony, Puyallup Fair, 1942. First post-war fair was September 1946. Camp Harmony was a relocation center, so they came in, they stayed in the animal stalls, and then were transferred to a more permanent camp. Local attorneys tried to show their loyalty by painting war board posters. Evacuees at Camp Harmony purchased more than $8,000 worth of government bonds to help pay for the war, as a way of saying, hey, we are Americans more than we are anything else. But the final report in 1893, Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Citizens, found property lost to the Japanese Americans through arson, theft, and vandalism was valued between $810 million to $2 billion. The further report placed the total loss of property and income during that period as high as $6.2 billion. And yet they were willing to spend money and buy bonds for a country that was not just relocating them, but taking away all the wealth and all the success and all the businesses and everything that they had accomplished in the United States, had taken that from them. Life in the internment camps, life in detention centers, families lived in substandard housing, had inadequate nutrition and health care, and had their livelihoods destroyed. Many continued to suffer psychologically long after the release. The Japanese were proud Americans, and to be put in this situation, to be put with other families, have no privacy, and struggle to do this, made it very difficult for them. Life in the camps, most of these were in deserts where there's extreme differences in temperature. And you can see here the cold, and most of these buildings were not well insulated, and so the conditions were pretty poor. But you can also see, this is a yearbook made from the Mendoza camp in California, and you can see here that they did their best to make a life out of it. You can see this family here. They were going to church. They had a baseball league. That they began to kind of develop a life within these camps. Many of them were allowed to leave the camp to go to jobs, to go to school, and so that became kind of something as part of their life. It was filled with group photos, snapshots, detailing daily life in the camp. The Japanese American Citizen League pledge. I pledge to assume my duties and obligations as a citizen cheerfully and without any reservations whatsoever, in the hope that I may become a better American in a greater America. Unrest in the camps. Because of the conditions, there were some issues of riots and different, as you could call it, unrest in the camps. Conditions of camps below standard, with poor sanitation, no privacy, and poor food. Santa Ana Assembly Center 2-day strike in June 1942 because of conditions in the camp. August 1942, 2,000 internees rioted. September 17th, 1942, there was a kitchen strike at Topaz. And so both of these cases, in Santa Anita, the Assembly Center, there was a 2-day strike because of the conditions in the camp. And so then there was a 2,000 internees rioted because they felt like the conditions were inhumane. These were people that were making camouflage nets at the camp, and this assembly workers, and there was 1,200 of them, and they they struck basically for 2 days, saying we're not going to create these because of how bad the conditions in the camps are. Less than 2 months later, August 4th, 1942, overzealous guards during a search for contraband caused a riot that reportedly included 2,000 internees and ultimately required the army to restore calm. And so you could see that the conditions and basically the way things were, especially at this assembly center that seemed to be poorly run, that were causing a lot of problems. Many problems initially pertained to poor camp conditions, such as the kitchen strike at Topaz, because of the type of food they were getting in and the type of work, what they expected of the workers. Other events involved mass protests, and there was even some shootings where guards shot at people that were protesting. In November of 1942, a disturbance at Postun occurred due to the arrest of 2 internees for beating up a suspected informer. 1,000 internees waited outside the camp jail, and a general strike took place throughout the camp. It was eventually resolved by releasing both men. So you can see that the Japanese did fight back at times and were protesting these conditions. And the Americans weren't taking them much better care than Canadians. But you can also see, if we compare the two, that the conditions in the U.S. camps, at least families were together. No, boys. This was because of a loyalty questionnaire crisis. In February of 1943, a major crisis occurred throughout the camps involving a questionnaire given to all draft-age internees. Its creation came out of the desire of the War Relocation Authority to gather information to streamline indefinite leave applications, which coincided with the military's desire to draft internees. The military needed people, and they wanted to draft the people they had interned. But there was 2 poorly worded questions, question 27 and 28. Everyone in the relocation at least 17 years of age needed to answer. But these were everyone, women and men, and women weren't allowed to serve. Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? Will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States of America and faithfully defend the United States from any and all attack by foreign or domestic forces, and forswear any form of allegiance to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? So basically 28 is saying, we don't let you become citizens if you immigrated here. We are interning you. But we want you to swear to America and swear any allegiance to any other country and basically become what's known as a stateless person. And so these were questions that were poorly worded, basically. And so there was a group of men who were of military age that answered no to both of these. And they were then moved to Tule Lake Camp. So the conclusion that all who answered no were disloyal to the United States was incorrect. A number of the Issei would have become U.S. citizens before World War II if they'd been allowed to naturalize. As described previously, many people answered no in order to keep their families together. There were also some who answered no out of anger as protest against a violation of their civil rights by their own government. The Nisei explained his no response to a government official as follows. 1,500 chose voluntary repatriation instead of answering yes to these. Because they felt so disrespected by the U.S. government. And this is one of the no boys and his response. Well, if you want to know, I said no, and I'm going to stick to no. If they want to segregate me, they can do it. If they want to take my citizenship away, they can do it. If this country doesn't want me, they can throw me out. What do they know about loyalty? I'm as loyal as anyone in this country. Maybe I'm as loyal as President Roosevelt. What business did they have asking me a question like that? And so basically you can say, well, why didn't they just write yes? But you can see in this case that many of that was part of why that would be the case. Now, anybody that answered no had to be segregated at Tule Lake. And Tule Lake was not a good place to be. There was a lot of allegations of prisoner brutality and a lot of cases where the people's rights, even in that camp, were abused. Okay, the 44nd Regimental Combat Team was a group of, this was a group of Japanese. They were made up, the core of it was the Japanese from Hawaii. They were the core of this group. But the regimental team was was highly decorated. This was one of the most highly decorated units. They were obviously sent to Europe to try and keep there from being any confusion from friendly fire or anything like that. But you can see as we continue on in this that they were well decorated and well respected. 1943, Congress authorized the formation of the U.S. Army's 44nd Regimental Combat Team, 3,000 member unit made up of the Hawaiian National Guard and soldiers from the mainland. Hawaiian Japanese, basically, when they first put this together, the Hawaiian Japanese wanted nothing to do with the mainland. Mainland Japanese, they called them katonks, basically, because of the sound of after their head hit the floor. The Hawaiian Japanese felt like they were whiners and bitching, and then they took the Hawaiian Japanese on a tour of the camps, and they at that point realized what had been going on in the mainland and what had happened to these others, and were pretty appalled themselves. At the same time, this was the most decorated Army unit in U.S. history, 20 Medals of Honor and other medals and Purple Hearts and other military decorations. Though Japanese internment was justified to us on the grounds that the Japanese were potentially disloyal, the record does not disclose a single case of Japanese disloyalty. Henry Steele, Keminger, writer for Harper's Magazine. So you could say one way or the other. Well, they weren't disloyal because they were in the camps, but either way, this shows that there was really no reason to do this. I want you to go ahead and read Section 1, Article 14 of the Constitution of the United States. What do you notice here? What is supposed to be protected? And it doesn't say anything about the idea of taking away these rights during wartime. There's 3 court cases, and this is a big difference between Canada and the United States. Hirabashi versus the United States. It was a student at University of Washington and decided to basically violate the curfew that happened when 9066 was passed. Then the Supreme Court actually upheld the conviction. And you might ask, well, why did they uphold it? Because they said that the military during wartime should be able to declare a curfew or be able to declare a military zone. And therefore, he should have followed it because the military obviously should have rights to be able to protect its citizens during war. Korematsu versus the United States, January 1945. Korematsu actually changed his appearance, tried to make himself look less Japanese with the hope that he wouldn't have to relocate, convicted of violating the order of internment, and the Supreme Court also upheld this conviction, saying that the military said you had to be relocated, and so therefore he broke that law, and the military has a right to set laws. Now, Endo versus the United States, she went to the camps. And then she filed a writ of habeas corpus saying, you need to charge me with a crime. She contended that she was not charged with a crime and as a citizen then should be released. The court agreed with her and said that she should be released, ending the internment in 1945. But a lot of the camps were beginning to release people for long extended periods of time and beginning to release people to work visas and our work contracts and other things, so many people were already leaving the camps when this court case came in. So this is what Black's reasoning for why they decided against those cases, and you can see kind of what happened here. And then we will talk about redress later in class. So that's the end of this podcast, and I will see you on Friday.